What's poppin', players? Welcome back to a Two Penny Games review, this time for Final Fantasy XVI. I am your host, Tavin, but I have not really played that much of Final Fantasy XVI, so I am joined by my good friend and co-host who's been diving deep into it all week. Say hello to the people, our lead reviewer, Connor Elliott.
Hi, gamers. I played 36 hours of Final Fantasy XVI, and I'm here to review it.
You are indeed. For context, I've played fucking maybe 4. I played enough for the B-roll footage that you're seeing on screen, which does not encapsulate all the mechanics of the game, I already know, but there's some fun stuff, there's some action and so forth. Wow, this game is dark in the recording, which is concerning. But anyways, Connor, you are our lead reviewer of Final Fantasy XVI. Go ahead, give us, what did you think of Final Fantasy XVI?
As arguably my most anticipated game of the year, I can say that it definitely sold itself on me by being an amazing game. I am, like I said before, 36 hours into the game. Haven't beaten the main story yet, though I've been desperately trying to. So as far as what makes Final Fantasy XVI so amazing is, first of all, the combat. It's fluid, it's responsive, it feels fun, it feels good to just take out a wide breadth of enemies using your icon abilities, which, the way it's an action-adventure game, kind of reminiscent of Devil May Cry, where you have less based on weapons and more based off abilities that you gain throughout the story. It allows you, the basic gameplay, the sword gameplay allows you to charge up your attacks, do heavy fireball hits with your sword, do a little bit of air combos, though it's not as extensive as something like Devil May Cry, but enough to make it, freshen up gameplay if you're tired of just going on the ground, using your basically blink ability to teleport right in front of other enemies and start striking them. You can easily just kind of be fighting one big enemy, and then you see, okay, well, this other smaller enemy is going to be coming, giving me some trouble. Let me go take care of him really quickly. And you have an ability known as Phoenix Shift when you start the game, where you just press circle and you can just zip over to wherever direction, or to another enemy that's off to the side or wherever. One of the great things about this game also is its story. It's very much influenced by Game of Thrones, taking a more dark, medieval fantasy game, but one that's not, the fantasy elements aren't in the story, are really delegated to the typical Final fantasy-isms that we've come to expect, particularly the monsters. I haven't fought any behemoths yet, but of course one of the main things in the story that's been marketed up until this point are the icons. Giant beasts that are pretty much seemingly kind of holy figures. It depends on the status of where they are in the world of Alethea, because it's being a political game, of course, is very diverse groups of people. There's the Duchy of Rosalith, the Duchy of Rosalith, that you start off in the game as. You have places like the Republic of Dalmekia, more of the very economical center of the world of Alethea, the typical very religious organization of the Holy Empire of Sambrek, and all of them come together fairly well. Each of them has a nice icon that throughout the story of the game you're kind of building up to fighting up against, because really, if you just look at the marketing of Final Fantasy, the boss fights of the icons and the icons themselves are really foremost amongst this game. A lot of the things that take place in the story are centered around it, since they're basically nukes, this world's equivalent of that, where it's pretty indispensable if your side has one. And since everybody has some, it kind of creates this really nice, tense situation where everyone's kind of equally powered due to having these, massive behemoths on their side that they can deploy basically whenever they want. And I've faced a couple of different icons, or I've done different icon battles. You're not always fighting against icons themselves, but they perform extremely well. The first one being very early in the opening hours of the game, which functions more as what do you call it, Deb? Not the
set piece.
Bullet set piece. Yeah, it's set piece, but it kind of like
the first one in the beginning game is more like
Star Fox gameplay,
like just kind of cinematic visual flair, like just to kind of like get you interested into the world. Like it's not mechanically very dense.
It's not until the next one, which comes into play, where it starts to, acclimate you to the powers of your icon, Ifrit, which it's really interesting because when you first play it, he's very slow and sluggish and super powerful, and it really gives you a lot of weight to the hits. And you first are like, okay, I don't know how they're exactly going to build off of this style of gameplay with the icons, because it's a lot more, like I said, slower than your base gameplay is, which makes sense considering the size and the power of the moves that you're doing. But that's only for plot reasons. Else, after that point, he becomes extremely fluid, fast-paced, and it completely gives you expectations of how these icon fights are going to be, and then changes them. And it really changes them based off of the enemy that you're fighting. One of the first ones you fight is a very mobile enemy, so you're trying to overcome it with your slow-moving character. Whereas is the next icon fight, it's one where it's the same kind of situation, but now you have the mobility, and it's trying to get you acclimated to the mobility of your icon abilities. And then the following fight, it's more, obviously you have to get up close to your opponent, but it's not a fast-moving one where trying to control spacing is a big element of it. And by that point, you've already gotten acclimated to what the gameplay is supposed to feel like as an icon, so it turns into this hard-hitting action game that's able to translate how you feel on the ground in normal gameplay, but give it a fresh breath of air through new abilities to your icon abilities and through your icon powers and creating set pieces. It's a very much cinematic. It's a very cinematic game, even to the point where you have QuickTime events, which haven't happened in a long time. And some people might have issue with that, and I understand why. People kind of see it as being very surface level, very bland. But this one, it uses it sparingly, and it's a way to kind of pacing up the combat, because you don't do massive amounts of damage in these boss fights, but those cinematics allow you to sometimes just do large chunks of health that get through the fight quicker and add that cinematic flair to it. I do have some, going back to the base combat though, which I kind of touched on it before about how you get other icon abilities. This one is very similar. As you go through the game, do the story, you gain the ability to use other icons that can be cycled out just with the press of L2. You can have 3 stocked up at any point in time. Each of them has 2 abilities, usually ones that are they're on a recharge period, and they generally do either large amounts of just base damage or stagger damage, which a lot of the gameplay, since I didn't mention it before, kind of wants you to stagger your opponent so that you can open them up to doing whatever abilities you have and not having to time them at all, just focus entirely on damage output, because the enemies are kind of spongy. They can take a lot of hits, but that kind of feeds into the main criticism I have of the combat, which is that old Final Fantasy games are very focused around the party. This is one of those that's more action adventure than past entries have been. 15 kind of established that, set the groundwork for it. 16 just pushed that a little bit further. And the issue that it kind of came across was it was so focused on making Clive feel really good and playing with him and his in-depth mechanics, that when you have party members in, you have very limited control over your dog, which works out. But then you have another character that usually comes in and helps you along the way. And both of those characters, you don't control the other one. They function on an AI system, but they have no health bar. They can't be taken out of the game in any way. So combat encounters are very easy at a certain point. I've heard some takes of people who have beaten the game and have gotten on New Game Plus saying that the challenge spikes upwards, but the base game just doesn't have that difficulty. So at a certain point, if the combat system on its own isn't already super difficult to get a grasp of, so you're already getting it down pretty quickly. And then when it throws you more icon abilities and not really throwing you enemies that, attack you in a smart way because of those party members that you have, because they don't have health, they can take care of, the smaller enemies if you're trying to take the big guy out. And then inevitably they're going to be able to, because they're efficient at AI, they're able to take out the other smaller enemies and then join you in ganging up on this big guy. Where if they just added a health-based system, they can actually, you would be more incentivized to turn away from your big enemy opponent and go and help your teammates that are distracting the enemies but are inevitably going to lose those fights because they aren't moving around and dodging attacks the same way you are. And so unfortunately, that has consistently been the underlying issue with this game, is I'm just not being challenged, like at all. And even though some people might say that I could not use some of the icon abilities to make fights go by a little bit slower, it should be accommodating those things rather than having you throw them out in sake of just being fighting more difficult enemies. Especially because I said that other people have said that the difficulty hikes up post-game. And so I don't know why they couldn't just have that kind of scaling of difficulty in the base game through your first experience, because it is a long game. I'm 36 hours in, as I said before, and I'm still in Act 2. And I haven't really done many side quests or extra content, which, to get to that, they have some pretty interesting ones and some pretty bad ones. So there's the basic side quests that are denoted by an exclamation mark, exclamation point. Those are almost always just the most generic, basic fetch quests. You go kill this enemy, get the item he drops, and then go back and turn it in, maybe for some kind of reward, usually just in the form of XP. But they're not really interesting, especially coming off the back of Yakuza 0, which I've been playing this past month, whose side quests are exceptional and feel incredibly unique, each one. I like them a lot. But these ones are just so the epitome of boring, generic side quests that infest a lot of other games that are unfortunately infesting this one as well. Though, that being said, there are special side quests that are denoted by a plus that usually have better benefits and are more interesting, either from a character perspective or from a mission perspective of what exactly it is you're doing in those. And sometimes what those tie into are monster hunts, which is a separate thing in and of itself, where you have a job board of monsters that are terrorizing the land, and you can go and accept them, find the enemy that it is, who are generally always going to be tougher than normal enemies, even if they're the same variety of other enemies that you fought up until that point, and gain renown specifically, which you can cash in for any kind of extra reward, sometimes extra equipment, extra ability points, crafting equipment so you can upgrade and create new weapons, new armor, new items as they're called, which unfortunately, once again, falls victim to something that a lot of other games nowadays do, which is like, oh, it does +3 to your defense and +8 to your damage or something like that. And it's like, oh, well, that doesn't really, I don't feel it changing anything. It doesn't even have a aesthetic purpose. It's just entirely a point system that you can't really tell affecting you because
number went up.
Yes, number went up for a game that already is easy as it is. So sometimes I'm even incentivized to not want to get new equipment because I'm just like, well, I'm already having an easy time as it is. If I just get a better weapon, I'm going to stick with that. But unfortunately, the weapons can look cool and they change. So I have that kind of weird desire to constantly get new weapons. The politics of the story are interesting, but it's not so heavy as I thought it was going in, because many other reviews have touched on that the third act of the game kind of just tosses those all out to the side in favor of the more traditional Final Fantasy elements, which I won't, for story purposes, spoil anything, but it can get kind of weird. And I'm expecting that to happen, but it's because it's set it up pretty well. Like, it doesn't seem to misguide you. Like, it's setting you up for a solely political game and then change the game on you. It's very much seen from a mile away, even if I didn't see other reviews denoting as such. And that's helped along by the fact that even though the politics are interesting and the characters within them are as well, it's not like Game of Thrones in the sense where that's really the crux of why you're playing this game. It's more character-focused than politics-focused. That's mainly the big points that I can cover at the moment.
There we go.
What's been your experience?
So yeah, again, I'm very, very early. The B-roll you're seeing in front of you is the majority of what I've played so far. And I've been jumping around to some of the more action bits of that B-roll because it did start with me running around the main base and like accepting the smaller side quests, which it's unfortunate to hear that most of them are like just kind of like whatever, but there are some really cool ones. So I'm excited to look into those. Overall, my early impressions are aligning pretty much exactly with what you just said, where the combat is fun, it's simple, flashy, it does engage the brain, but it does seem to be a little, at its base, a little simple and easy. I could see if, like, damage numbers started going up higher from the enemies, that, like, it could provide a challenge, but at the same time, like, just the way that all of the systems kind of work together, I don't foresee myself having a lot of issues in this game. To get into the nitty-gritty of that, the dodge versus the parry, I have not found the timing for the parries. I've been dodging everything. Is that kind of your experience as well, or do you parry a fair amount?
No, I definitely dodge more. Parry, it's something that I get the timing down now, but overall, I'm already doing so much damage and such that I never feel much of an incentive to use the parry unless I want to feel cool or interrupt some big. Its main purpose to me is to interrupt the big attacks that some enemies do, because you can parry those, and dodging them can just kind of slow down the fight. once again, going back to the difficulty of it, particularly with your allies who just do damage with really no negatives whatsoever, they just you're dominating every enemy that you come across,
It
regardless of the
has
size
felt
of
that
them.
like even if like if I'm in an encounter with a stronger enemy, if I just pull back for a little while, like and just like evade the entire fight, it feels like I could just like not interact with the fight, and the fight would still like end in a victory to
Mhm.
that point. Um, a lot of like the like collectible things that you're getting, like crafting materials and stuff, I have not yet seen how that is useful. Um, and it just to me it just feels like, hey man, we're here for the flashy combat. It's engaging enough to where like you can't like turn your brain off, but like you don't have to think very hard when doing this. This is not um like a FromSoft game, or even like Final Fantasy VII Remake required more thought and knowledge of mechanics than what I'm seeing here. Um, so I I think this game is so far fun to play and good, and I want to see it through. But if it is as you say, is the mechanics don't like get too much more interesting, I don't know if it's going to carry me through the entire story. But I will say the story is good so far.
It, it
I've liked the story quite a bit.
it's written well, and it consistently is. The dialogue, the relations between the characters is one of the more interesting parts of the game. One of the main allies that you have, I've kind of prevented saying her name, but it's kind of almost public knowledge at this point for anyone that's focused on this game a little bit. It's a character named Jill, a childhood friend of the main character. Their relationship is great. You know, it reminds a lot of people of me included of like Tifa and Cloud, childhood friends that kind of have that kind of have emotions for one another, but they don't exactly, you know, share them in a romantically intimate way, but
Yeah.
in an intimate way, like as very, very, very close friends would be. Torgal's just a nice companion. The voice acting is pretty great, particularly Sid, one of the characters
Yeah.
that you meet early on. Yeah, he's a famous actor, the person who plays that character's voice, so you know he does a great job as well. Dion, one of the princes of Sam Breck, came out of nowhere being a good character. Like they do some things with him that, especially for a JRPG, I was surprised at. I'll hold off saying what that means, but I think when you first start getting acclimated to that character, introduced to them, you'll know what I mean, like almost instantly. But I'm really worried about one other thing, which is the villain. Like I said, it's kind of getting it's going to end up in a very obvious Final Fantasy way near the end. But there's a character who functions more as a common villain from the beginning of the game to now, who has done way more than the main villain has done the few times that we've seen the main villain. This other character, I'm not going to say any names, is just like you just hate this person. Whenever they pop up on screen, it does a really good job of just making that emotion of hate rise within you, because it's just a unapologetically evil person, but someone who's believably evil. They're not so just, ooh, I'm, the cackling, evil mastermind in my tower. They are that, but their motivations are just so disgustingly, evil, but in a realistic way, especially
Nice.
given the setting of the world.
And I did text you early on when I was playing. I was honestly surprised at how well written it is. Like, and I'm talking moment to moment dialogue. I don't know if this is due to the localization team or like the original writings of the Square Enix team, but you just kind of believe everything, which is something that like doesn't always translate very well. For example, Final Fantasy VII Remake is well written, but I would argue it's not the best localized, because there's a lot of moments where like a character kind of grunts, or there's an awkward pause, or somebody says something that maybe in Japanese culture that's cool, but here it just kind of comes off as awkward. That there's none of that here in my early hours, where it's just like constantly like characters are reacting appropriately. Like it feels like everybody is like, it feels like a Western game essentially. And I think that was a lot of their intention with just crafting the game, from combat styles to the political aspect of it, to just sort of how the story unfolds in itself and the drama of it. It feels very Western. And I'm of two minds of that personally, because in my early hours, I found more I was excited more by Final Fantasy VII Remake than I have been by 16 here. And this is a cool place for the franchise to explore and to be in, but it is not one that I want the franchise to make its main gameplay centered around.
I agree.
How you agree? You're with that?
Yeah, it's a lot of what has to just go back to the combat. Final Fantasy VII Remake is something that I thought it would take a lot more inspiration from. One where there is a lot more active fighting, but you're going to take hits. So your kind of goal is to minimize that as much as you possibly can, but you're never going to be able to escape it. This way, in this game, similar to 15, I feel like it's, as you said, it's very easy just to dodge the enemy's attacks. That's kind of the core, but the dodge mechanics just seem too good. And so once again, I guess I could just not use the dodge mechanic and try and just rely on the parry, because it does make you feel cool and it is effective at just getting in a lot of damage. But I don't want to limit myself for how I play the game when it could have just been done better right out the gate.
Yeah, it's like a weird thing where, like, even though 7 Remake was an action game, sure, but like there was still moments of that game where if you were not paying attention, like things still kind of played out almost in a turn-based style. With how the ATB system worked and like how you would see your enemies charge up attacks that you knew were going to be very dangerous and you had to get away and manage your party in that sense. Here it just kind of feels like I can just press what's the dodge button? R1. I can just press R1 all the time or whenever I want. I can just mash it and be safe and fine. It doesn't feel like the onus is on me as a player to really learn the systems. It feels like it's sort of like aiming for the lowest. What is the like it's focused on the lower, like the what is the words I'm looking for? Like the lower tier player. Like it's trying to be more general in that, and it's lowered the skill floor and the skill ceiling like dramatically.
I think what could have fixed that is a difficulty setting right off the bat, because it just kind of there's no hard mode, I should say.
Yeah,
it doesn't allow
you
to
throw you in, right?
There's one where it makes it easier, and the one that makes it like more focused on like a balance between gameplay and story.
And then even in that, they give you items to make the game easier.
They do, yes. Which that's all you kind of really needed to do, instead of adding a whole not like easy and very easy mode, and then extremely easy. It seems to be the main options that you have because of those rings. And to your point earlier about like, just because I don't want to forget about it, localization, how this game just does that a lot better. Mm-hmm. One of the weird things about this game that I found out after the fact is that the lip syncing does not, the lips aren't synced in the Japanese version of the game. So it's primarily a game where you're doing it in English. Like, it was made for that English audience, as you said, like how they acclimated the gameplay to be more action adventure, which I like in this game. I just don't want them to do it in further Final Fantasies.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I like this game. I want to keep playing it. I just don't think it's like, even like a Witcher 3 is deeper than, like, way deeper than this. And I think that's the thing, is like this game just isn't much of an RPG. Like, yes, you're playing the role of Clive, and yes, it's called Final Fantasy, and yes, you end a battle and you level up and all of your numbers go up, but like, there's nothing like the materia system, or like how you were saying, like the armor and weapon system, like, doesn't really, like, it's not super in depth. Like, you can't plan it out. You can't really adjust the settings of your party, and you're not like unlocking abilities in the sense of like oh, like now I've got this whole like tree of upgrades that I can do. It's literally just like a circle, and you go, all right, now I can do this move, now I can do this move, now I can do this. It's that critique I have of some games where it's like, oh, it's not that I didn't, it's not that I'm leveling up and getting stronger or creating a build. It's just you were limiting my options as a player until you decided it's time for me to have those options again. Which kind of annoys me, because it makes the game less replayable in my mind, because then it's like I can't do the dodges or I can't do the specific attacks that I want to do until I hit a certain point in the narrative, or I hit a certain point of grinding out XP and stuff like that. So it's just like, man, like this, like, I like this game. I think it's going to be a great action adventure game, but the reason action adventure games are usually 10 to 15 hours, 20 hours, sometimes long, is because they know their gameplay loop can't sustain the 40, 50, 60, 80-hour adventures that RPGs typically do. And for this one to have that length of gameplay or that length of runtime with this level of gameplay, it's like, I don't know if I'm going to make it to the end of this.
Mm-hmm. I agree, especially when you factor in that it doesn't even have like the ability to take advantage of elemental differences. I don't feel like electricity does more against.
There's no
water.
Like rock paper scissors to it.
Yes, there's no it's kind of just different flavors that it gives you with like your ranged attacks or your like I said, your icon abilities, which have the flair of whatever icon the element is represented there, and it does damage. It does work, but it doesn't have that extra level of detail.
It just feels like all right, this move does more damage.
Yeah,
like the number is just higher with this move, and it's like to your point, like the first econ you get is fire. You're not setting dudes on fire. You're not like burning them up or anything. It doesn't look like they're reacting to the fire. They're just taking damage, and I'm like, all right, okay, so these are just damage sponge enemies that I want to stagger them up so that they can take more damage, and it's just like, how much damage can I output in a flashy way? Which is fun. Don't get me wrong. It's fun, and it feels good to play. But it's just like, will this last 40 hours? I don't know.
I would say it definitely is entertaining me, and I think it's going to keep my attention until the end. But it's, as you said, I don't really have much of an incentive already to go back to it. Yeah. Even though knowing it's going to be harder, it's like, I should have just gotten that from the get-go rather than having to play it again to get the more refined experience that I want.
Yeah, and it was like, and to bring the comparison back to 7 Remake, like, there were difficulty spikes in that game that made you go, oh shit, I have to like pay attention in this fight. I can't just like hack and slash my way through it like I've done so many others. I have to pay attention during the Bahamut fight at the end, or during the different like mechs you fight throughout the game, or the Turk fights or something like that. Like, you have to pay attention and use every element of the mechanics. And then when you do unlock hard mode after you beat the game on normal, it's not only that it's a difficulty spike, the game plays in a dramatically different way in 7 Remake. It's not just damage numbers going up, it's characters will have different moves, or the sort of like weaknesses and strengths will be amplified. So now you really want to play into the different uses of your materias and so forth. Whereas this, I honestly just feel like it's like, all right, 40 hours of mashing square and triangle until and occasionally hitting R1 to dodge, and then another 40 hours of doing that but a little bit longer each time.
Mm-hmm. It just doesn't work as well in the long run. But
yeah.
I feel unfair of constantly saying, like, bringing up Final Fantasy VII Remake, because it's hard not to, because it's so recent and because it had gameplay elements that I would hoped would have been more implemented here, particularly how you but manage your party. So I think you should have just stuck with Clive, of course. There's no reason to be able to play as Torgal or Jill. Clive is he just needs to have to do other things than just beyond focusing on a single enemy and getting his stagger meter down and doing massive amounts of damage to him.
But again, if we were managing party members like how we did in 7 Remake, or if it was more simple of like telling Sid, hey, get aggressive here. Get aggressive right now. Or hey, Sid, be on defense right now because your health is low. Or Jill, I'm assuming Jill becomes the healer role. Jill, focus healing Sid, not me. Like, or focus healing yourself. Or Jill, run back and do something. Like, if it was something like that. And these are still commands that can be tied to the D-pad, like they have with the dog or with the use of items. But with the dog, it's literally just like, all right, occasionally I just press up or down to like make the dog do one specific flashy move, or make him heal me or something like that. So it's just like, is this actually control, or is he just another item? It doesn't feel like a character. It feels like I'm using items, and that's not as engaging as as other options that we could have gone here. So, like, again, I'm at least glad that they're willing to experiment with the formula. And if there's one thing you can say about Final Fantasy, they've always been willing to experiment with the formula. This is just not something
went to MMOs.
Yeah, literally. This is just not something I would like to see for a Final Fantasy 17, and I don't want the success of this game to affect what would be Final Fantasy 7 Remake Part 3.
Yeah, and hopefully, I don't think it will, especially because the development team seems to be separate in that regard for what they're trying to make. But I'm really itching to get back to the story and to continue playing the fun combat, particularly the icon fights, which, like I said, that's some of the best boss fights I've had in recent years. They're very, very good and feel good to play.
Yeah,
and I know I'm probably not even at the best ones yet.
Yeah, but I'll say this is like to the benefit of the story. Like, I'm itching to find out. There's the inciting incident of the game happens in the first 2 hours or whatever, and Clive's interpretation of that incident is very different than what actually happened, and I'm itching to find out what happens when he discovers the truth. Like, I really want to see what happens when he finds out. So, like, if they can continue that loop, that hook of, like, this is really interesting, can't wait for the characters to discover this, or wow, this is interesting and I'm discovering it at the same time as the characters, like that level of surprise and writing in it, and the heart and the emotions you feel from it, that could be enough to carry me through the game, even though, like, the combat system, like, isn't deep enough to do it itself.
Yeah, thankfully, like I said, the plot, the world building, because the world of Alisthea is also very interesting. How not the economy, how the society is set up, how it functions. Culture, yeah. It gets an emotional response out of me, particularly in regards to the bearers, which are slaves. Slaves that people who are born with the ability to use magic, and so they are used as slave labor. And it genuinely just kind of, like, you see a very stark difference between how they treat, like, you see someone who have like a nice personality to you, but then when it's toward a bearer, instantly it changes and they become vitriolic and evil.
Bringing that up specifically, the game has been criticized by a couple of people for not having a very visually diverse cast to it. Like, everybody's white. When we start discussing these social elements in it and how they apply to the real world, and I understand the argument is like, oh, but it's all European, like, stylings or whatever. But, like, okay, but Europeans did fucked up shit to people of color. So, like, we can't just, like, use that as an excuse every time. And in a game called Final Fantasy, and we're doing dragons and phoenixes and magic and all of this, how do you feel about the choice to pretty much exclude people of color in this?
Yeah, going back to the bearers, the slave labor, I think that's really the core reason of why they didn't want to do it. I think most people would have been able to have that in the game and be reasonable and be smart about it, knowing that they're not trying to make some grand statement about slavery. But I think it was them just trying to avoid, because it's a Japanese company at the end of the day. They're not like,
if they
American
mishandle
companies.
that's worse than the criticisms they're getting here.
Yeah, and so I think they made the correct decision from their perspective of not having people of color in the game. But at the same time, I think it would have been completely fine to have them in there. But I get why they didn't. I think it would have been better to be a bit more honest rather than say, oh, it's a medieval European setting, because it is, of course, at the end of the day, a fantasy game, a Final Fantasy game. Yeah. And that shouldn't really hold that much weight in the race of the characters. But I think they had enough reason not to do it.
You could have just detached real world race politics from your in-universe race politics. Like, the slaves you said are magic users. So, like, why can't we have, black or Asian non-magic users and magic users? Like, to where, like, we sort of detach race from that conversation, but still get our representation that everybody would like. These are things that I'm just throwing out there as ideas. Like, I don't necessarily feel strongly one way or the other, but, we're two white guys.
Yeah. Take that what you will.
Yeah. Oh, there was something else, but I've forgotten it now. Oh, the active, what do they call it? The active timeline thing? Or yes. the lore tracker or whatever the thing, where it's very much like if you've ever, like, watched anything on Amazon Prime, when you pause it and it brings up, like, the actors, like, little, like, bio or whatever. This game has that, and it, like, actively updates as you progress and stuff, and it plays to the characters in the scene and bases like as the story progresses, that information changes and so forth. Like, I love that. That's really well
I do
done.
too.
That
And it even
that must have
tells you
taken so much work to do.
it tells you information that you otherwise wouldn't have known if you didn't look. It's not need to know information, but it's things that get you a better understanding of the character. Or if you like, okay, who is this guy again? What's their relation to? Oh, okay, that's the role they play in this world. And sometimes you just need those little fresh, hints. And because it updates it in the middle of cutscenes, a character will come in and I'll be like, I've seen this character before. I just can't remember who were they serving? And I pause it and it's like, oh yeah, there he is. Oh, okay, yeah, that's what he does. Okay, good to know. It's just a nice little addition.
Yeah, that's really nice. I really like that. So, Connor, is there anything else you want to mention about Final Fantasy 16 before we wrap it up here, sir?
I think we exhausted it.
There we go. Final Fantasy 16, good game. Oh, we had a conversation, I believe, on the Piggy Bank, which you can catch next week on youtube.com/@2pennygames at Saturday, 8 a.m. I had the theory that depending on the success of games like Starfield, there's really 3 big contenders for Game of the Year so far, and that being obviously Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, hopefully Starfield, and it seems like this one, Final Fantasy 16. Where do you think all of this lands in that conversation?
It's strange. I would consider Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, a masterpiece, but ultimately that's a large part of that is because they added on all these other different systems that just enhanced the original Breath of the Wild experience while retaining that same thing. But this one just does, even though that's interesting, unique, new. This one's from the ground up is different. It's not like it has an equivalent. Maybe it takes some inspirations from Final Fantasy 15, some with 7 remake, but it's more of a unique game that, even though I would say isn't as good at the core of it as Tears of the Kingdom, I'm more impressed with it this year.
It's more exciting.
I think it's more exciting. So on my top 10 list, it's probably going to go. I always decide at the end of the year, though, because I'm still just playing this now. Of course, who knows if I'll think the same thing a month from later. But for right now, I'm enjoying playing this game more than Tears of the Kingdom. So I would put it up higher. And Starfield still has that potential of being a really interesting open world game, or not being that. So I'll have to see how that one plays out. And of course, Baldur's Gate 3 is the other big contender for myself, the RPG fan that I am.
Yeah.
So wait and see.
Wait and see, indeed. I mean, in terms of just Game of the Year conversations as a whole, I would like to include Spider-Man 2 in there, but I feel like Spider-Man 2 is just going to be more Spider-Man, and we kind of know what that is, and Spider-Man wasn't Game of the Year in the year that it came out. So this year being, I would argue, one of, if not the best years in gaming ever, I would say this game probably, or Spider-Man 2 just doesn't really have a solid shot, which is unfortunate because I'm sure it's going to be a banger. But
it could.
Yeah, so I'm very, very, I'm excited to play more. And your review sort of solidified what my expectations were from early on. Like, I don't think I'm going to hit hour 10 and suddenly, like, it's going to click or change or anything. But I do think, what I've felt so far is going to continue. And that's a good thing because I felt mostly good things about the game. Ladies and gentlemen, that is it for your Final Fantasy 16 review. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Ring off in the comments how you felt about Final Fantasy 16. And keep an eye out for the YouTube short/TikTok version of the game. Until next time, have a great time. And Connor, say goodbye to the people.
See you later.